Montana Territory, 1873. The frontier town of Silverdale sat like a rough-hewn jewel at the base of the Bitterroot Mountains, where the wind carried whispers of opportunity and danger in equal measure. Young Yates Young rode into town with nothing but his stallion Shadow, a Winchester rifle, and a heart hardened against attachment. At 25, he had the lean, muscular build of a man who spent most of his life in the saddle. His face might have been considered handsome if not for the permanent furrow between his brows and the way his blue eyes seemed to evaluate everyone as a potential threat. The last 5 years had taught Yates that caring for others was a liability on the frontier. After losing his family to a raid on their homestead in Kansas, he drifted westward, taking work where he could find it, driving cattle, hunting bounties, and occasionally serving as a hired gun. Not an outlaw, but close enough to understand their thinking. His code was simple: do the job, get paid, move on, no friendships, no entanglements, no weakness. The moment you start caring about folks, he often muttered to Shadow, is the moment you give this land power to break you. Silverdale was supposed to be just another stop on his endless journey. The cattle baron Theodore Wilcox had hired him to help with spring roundup and ward off rustlers who'd been plaguing the region. Good money for 3 months' work, then he'd be gone again before anyone could learn his name or story. Just the way he wanted it, Yates secured lodging at the Frontier Inn and spent his first evening observing the town from a corner table in the Silverdale saloon. The usual frontier types populated the establishment: miners with dirt still caked under their fingernails, ranchers discussing cattle prices, a few soiled doves working the room, and the occasional drifter like himself, keeping to the shadows. "You must be Wilcox's new man," said a gruff voice. Yates looked up to find a weathered ranch foreman standing beside his table. "Foreman Garrett," the man introduced himself. "We ride out at dawn. Boss says you're good with a gun." "Might need that skill. Rustlers around these parts are getting bold." "I'll be ready," Yates replied, keeping his response brief as always. After Garrett departed, Yates noticed a commotion near the saloon entrance. A young woman had entered, unusual enough in this establishment, and was making her way confidently through the room. She looked no more than 20 years old, with honey blonde hair pinned neatly beneath a modest bonnet. Her blue calico dress was simple but well-maintained, marking her as respectable. Unlike the painted women working the saloon, she carried herself with quiet dignity. "Miss Anderson," the bartender called out. "Your father's medicine is ready." He slid a small package across the counter. "Thank you, Mr. Hobson." Her voice carried the softness of the eastern states, but with a determined undertone that suggested she'd adapted to frontier life. As she turned to leave, a drunken miner blocked her path. "Pretty little thing like you shouldn't be in a place like this," he slurred, reaching for her arm. Yates watched impassively, not his concern, not his fight. But something in the young woman's response caught his attention. Instead of showing fear, she simply stepped back and said with surprising gentleness, "Mr. Sullivan, your wife needs you at home. Your boy's been asking for his pa all day." The miner's hand dropped, shame crossing his features. "Hannah, you tell Martha I'm on my way," he mumbled, then shuffled toward the door. The young woman Hannah continued toward the exit, briefly making eye contact with Yates. For a moment, he felt uncomfortably exposed, as though her clear green eyes could read every dark thought and painful memory he carried. He looked away first. Dawn broke cold and clear as Yates joined the Wilcox Ranch hands. The work was familiar: long days in the saddle, rounding up cattle that had scattered across the valleys and foothills during the winter months. Yates kept to himself, eating alone by the campfire each night while the other men shared stories and laughter. A week into the roundup, they encountered trouble. 3 calves slaughtered, with only the choice cuts taken, the wasteful work of rustlers marking their territory. Garrett sent Yates and 2 other men to track the culprits while the rest continued with the roundup. "They're heading toward Anderson's place," said Pete, one of the ranch hands, as they followed the trail. "Poor folks have had enough trouble without rustlers targeting them next." "What kind of trouble?" Yates asked, surprising himself with the question. "Doc Anderson moved here with his daughter about 3 years back. His wife died on the journey west. He's the only doctor for 50 miles, but he's been ailing himself lately. Daughter's been keeping things going, smartest girl you ever met. Reads medical books and helps with patients." The trail led them to a small creek where the rustlers had made camp. 4 men, currently away from their campsite hunting. Yates and the others waited in the brush, planning to surprise them upon return. As they waited, Yates noticed smoke rising from beyond a nearby ridge. That the Anderson place?" he asked quietly. Pete nodded. "Just over that hill." The sound of approaching horses signaled the rustlers' return. The ensuing confrontation was brief but violent. One rustler dead, another wounded, two fleeing. Yates had taken down the leader with a clean shot when the man drew first. "We should check on the Anderson place," Pete suggested as they secured the wounded rustler to his horse. "These vermin might have friends." Reluctantly, Yates agreed. The Anderson homestead consisted of a modest cabin with a separate, smaller structure bearing a sign reading Medical Office. A small garden was meticulously maintained alongside a chicken coop. As they approached, Hannah Anderson emerged from the cabin, shotgun in hand. "State your business," she called out firmly. "Miss Anderson, it's Pete from Wilcox Ranch," Pete called back. "We tracked some rustlers near your property. Wanted to make sure you and the doctor are safe." Hannah lowered the shotgun as they dismounted. "We're fine, thank you." Her eyes settled on Yates, recognition flickering across her features. "You were at the saloon the other night." Yates merely nodded. "This here's Yates Young, Miss Hannah," Pete explained. "New hand helping with security. Best shot in 3 territories, they say." "Is that something to boast about, Mr. Young?" she asked, her tone not judgmental but genuinely curious. "It's a skill, like any other," Yates replied tersely. She studied him for a moment longer than was comfortable. "Would you gentlemen like some coffee? I just made a fresh pot." Pete eagerly accepted, while Yates tried to decline, but somehow found himself seated at the Andersons' kitchen table anyway. The cabin interior was modest but immaculately kept. Medical books lined a small bookshelf and herbs hung drying from the rafters. "My father's resting," Hannah explained, pouring coffee into chipped but clean cups. "His lungs trouble him, especially in the damper months." At 20 years old, Hannah possessed a maturity beyond her years. Up close, Yates could see the faint shadows beneath her eyes, evidence of long nights caring for her father and his patients. Yet there was a serene strength in her bearing that couldn't be diminished by fatigue. "Any trouble with strangers around your property, Miss Anderson?" Yates found himself asking. "Nothing unusual. Father treats all manner of people, miners, travelers, even an Indian family from the reservation last month." She set a plate of simple biscuits on the table. "Everyone needs healing sometimes, Mr. Young." Something in her tone made Yates wonder if she was speaking about more than physical ailments. As they prepared to leave, Hannah approached Yates while Pete readied the horses. "Mr. Young," she said quietly, "if you ever need medical attention or just a cup of coffee, our door is open." "I appreciate the offer, Miss Anderson, but I won't be in these parts long," he replied. A small smile touched her lips. "Few people ever plan to stay in Silverdale, Mr. Young, yet many find reasons to remain." The roundup continued for another 2 weeks without incident. Yates maintained his solitary habits, though he found his thoughts occasionally drifting to the Anderson homestead and its remarkable young caretaker. He told himself it was merely professional concern. Isolated homesteads were vulnerable, especially with a sickly man and young woman as the only occupants. When the ranch hands returned to town for supplies, Yates found himself riding past the doctor's place. He justified it as perimeter security, though even to himself the excuse rang hollow. Hannah was in the garden, kneeling among rows of what appeared to be medicinal herbs. She looked up at the sound of approaching hoofbeats, shielding her eyes against the sun. "Mr. Young," she called in greeting, "out patrolling?" "Something like that," he replied, remaining mounted. "Any trouble?" "None worth mentioning." She stood, brushing soil from her apron. "Though I could use a strong arm for a moment if you can spare it. One of our shutters came loose in last night's wind." Before he could formulate a reason to refuse, Yates found himself dismounting. The task was simple enough. The wooden shutter had pulled away from its hinges. As he worked, Hannah brought him water and spoke of inconsequential matters, the promising growth of her herb garden, the new schoolteacher arriving next month, the church social plan for midsummer. "You speak as though this place is permanent," Yates commented as he hammered the final nail. "The frontier changes, towns die, people move on." Hannah considered this. "Of course nothing is truly permanent, Mr. Young. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't build and tend and care while we're here." She gestured toward her garden. "Those plants will die come winter, but I still water them today." "Seems futile." "I prefer to call it hopeful." She studied him openly. "May I ask what brought you to Montana Territory?" Work, he answered simply, and before that. More work, different places. Hannah smiled slightly. You excel at saying much while revealing nothing, Mr. Young. A sudden coughing from inside the cabin interrupted their conversation. Hannah's expression shifted to concern. Father's having a difficult day. I should go to him. Of course, Yates gathered his tools. The shutter should hold now. Thank you, she hesitated, then added, Sunday is service at the church, followed by a community dinner. Everyone's welcome, even solitary cowboys. Yates mounted shadow. I'm not much for churches, Miss Anderson. The food then, she suggested with a smile. Mrs. Fitzgerald makes peach cobbler that might change your opinion on community gatherings. He tipped his hat and rode away without committing, yet found himself strangely troubled by the conversation. Hannah Anderson approached life with an openness that Yates had long ago determined was dangerous. Her willingness to see good in others, even a hardened drifter like himself, seemed foolishly naive. Yet he couldn't deny there was strength in her optimism, a different kind than the vigilant self-preservation he practiced. That night at the campfire, Yates found himself listening more closely to the ranch hands' conversations. Shame about Doc Anderson, one was saying. Town won't be the same if he passes. What will happen to Hannah? Another asked. Young woman alone out here. Blacksmith's son's been sweet on her for months, Pete chimed in. Wouldn't surprise me if he offered for her once mornings proper. The thought of Hannah married to some local boy provoked an unexpected surge of annoyance in Yates. He stood abruptly and walked away from the fire, attributing his reaction to simple concern for a vulnerable neighbor, nothing more. The following Sunday, Yates told himself repeatedly he wouldn't attend the church gathering. Yet as the appointed hour approached, he found himself brushing his coat, trimming his light stubble, and riding toward the white clapboard building at Silverdale's center. He arrived late, slipping into the back pew as the congregation sang a hymn. From his position, he could see Hannah's honey-blonde hair a few rows ahead, her voice rising clear and true among the others. Beside her sat an elderly man who could only be her father, thin and stooped, but with the same dignified bearing as his daughter. After the service, tables were arranged on the grass outside, laden with food contributed by the townsfolk. Yates lingered at the edges, uncomfortable with the easy familiarity everyone showed one another. You came, said Hannah, appearing at his side with 2 plates of food. She handed him one. I'm glad. Just passing by, he lied. Her knowing smile suggested she didn't believe him. Have you met my father? He's resting under that oak tree. I'm sure he'd appreciate some company besides fussing women while I help serve. Before Yates could object, Hannah was leading him toward a frail figure, seated in a chair beneath a sprawling oak. Father, this is Mr. Yates Young, one of Mr. Wilcox's men, the one who fixed our shutter. Dr. Anderson looked up with eyes that, despite his illness, remained sharp and perceptive. Ah, the mysterious gunman my daughter has mentioned. Please sit with an old man, while the ladies busy themselves feeding everyone. Trapped by politeness, Yates took a seat on the bench beside the doctor. My Hannah says you're a man of few words, Dr. Anderson remarked, studying Yates. I respect that quality. Too many people fill silence with nonsense. To Yates' surprise, the doctor proved to be an easy companion. He didn't press for personal details but spoke of his observations of frontier life, the town's growth, and occasionally his concerns for his daughter's future. She deserves more than being tied to a sick old man and a struggling frontier practice, Dr. Anderson said quietly, watching Hannah laughing with other young women by the food tables. But she refuses every suggestion that she return east to her mother's family. She seems content here, Yates observed. Content perhaps, but fulfilled, the doctor sighed. Hannah has a remarkable mind and a healer's instincts. I've taught her everything I could. In Philadelphia, she could study properly, make something of herself beyond this backwater. Yet she stays. Out of loyalty to me, the doctor's eyes clouded. A mixed blessing, having a daughter who puts duty above her own happiness. The conversation gave Yates much to consider as he rode back to the ranch that evening. Hannah's dedication to her father and their community challenged his belief that attachment only led to pain. She seemed to draw strength from her connections rather than being weakened by them. As spring turned to summer, Yates found himself making increasingly frequent visits to the Anderson homestead. He justified each one differently, checking security, helping with repairs the doctor couldn't manage, delivering messages from town. The truth, which he barely acknowledged even to himself, was that he found peace in Hannah's presence that he'd experienced nowhere else in his years of wandering. Their conversations ranged widely. Hannah was well-read despite the frontier's limitations and eager to discuss ideas. She never pressed Yates about his past, yet gradually he found himself revealing small pieces of his history, his childhood in Ohio, his family's westward journey, his skill with horses. "You speak of Shadow almost like a person," Hannah observed one afternoon as they repaired fencing around her vegetable garden. "He understands me better than most people," Yates admitted. "And what does Shadow understand about you that others don't?" Yates paused, considering that some things don't need words. Hannah's smile was gentle. "I've noticed you say the most when you're not speaking at all, Mr. Young." July brought scorching heat, and with it, trouble. A group of cattle rustlers more organized than the previous ones began targeting ranches throughout the region. Wilcox's operation suffered substantial losses, and tensions ran high. Yates spent long nights on patrol, his visits to the Anderson place becoming less frequent. When a substantial reward was posted for the rustlers' ringleader, Yates recognized the name immediately. Maxwell Reeves, an outlaw he'd encountered years earlier in Wyoming territory, a dangerous man with a personal vendetta against lawmen and those who assisted them. The knowledge that such a man operated in proximity to Silverdale to Hannah awakened a protectiveness in Yates he'd long suppressed. He began escorting her on her rounds to outlying homesteads when she delivered medicines or tended to patients her father couldn't reach. "I'm perfectly capable of making these trips alone," Hannah protested the first time he appeared alongside her wagon. "I've been doing so for years." "Humor me," Yates replied simply. During these journeys, Yates observed Hannah's medical skills firsthand. She had a natural way with patients, combining her father's teachings with her own intuitive understanding of people. Children especially responded to her gentle manner, allowing treatments they might have resisted from others. "You should have been a doctor yourself," Yates commented after watching her splint a ranch hand's broken arm with confident efficiency. "Perhaps in another life," she replied, packing her medical bag. "Here I'm simply my father's assistant." "You're more than that," Yates said before he could stop himself. "These people trust you with their lives." Hannah looked at him with surprise, unused to such direct praise from the reticent cowboy. "Thank you," she said softly. "That means a great deal, especially coming from someone who doesn't offer empty compliments." Something shifted between them that day, a recognition of mutual respect that bordered on deeper feeling. Yates found himself thinking of Hannah at odd moments during the day, remembering the way sunlight caught in her hair or how her voice changed when speaking of things she cared about. It terrified him. Attachment meant vulnerability. Vulnerability meant eventual pain. He'd lived by this truth since watching his family's homestead burn, yet Hannah's presence in his life challenged this fundamental belief, suggesting the possibility that connections might provide strength rather than weakness. In August, Dr. Anderson's health took a sharp decline. Hannah sent for Yates with an urgent message, and he arrived at their cabin to find her exhausted after 3 sleepless nights tending her father. "The fever won't break," she explained, her usual composure cracking. "I've tried everything he taught me, but—" "What do you need?" Yates asked simply. "Someone to sit with him while I prepare more willow bark tea. And perhaps," she hesitated, "perhaps someone to remind me I'm not alone in this." The naked vulnerability in her request moved something deep within Yates. He squeezed her hand briefly. "You're not alone." Through the night, they took turns at the doctor's bedside. During Hannah's brief rest, Yates sat watching the labored rise and fall of the old man's chest, contemplating how this small family had somehow breached his carefully constructed defenses. Near dawn, the doctor's fever finally broke. As pale sunlight filtered through the cabin windows, Hannah wept with relief against Yates' shoulder. Without thinking, he wrapped an arm around her, drawing her close. "Thank you for staying," she whispered. "I couldn't have done otherwise," he admitted, the truth of the words surprising him even as he spoke them. As the doctor slowly recovered, Yates found himself at a crossroads. His contract with Wilcox would end with the summer. By all his previous patterns, he should be planning his departure, deciding which territory to drift to next. Instead, he found himself considering possibilities in Silverdale. The town had needs a man of his skills could fill. The sheriff had mentioned wanting a deputy, and Wilcox had hinted at a permanent position. For the first time in years, Yates contemplated staying put, putting down roots somewhere. Hannah never asked about his plans, but he sometimes caught her watching him with a question in her eyes. The unspoken possibility between them hung in the air during their conversations, a future neither dared articulate. Late August brought the county fair to Silverdale, a rare celebration that drew people from neighboring settlements. Despite his usual aversion to crowds, Yates found himself attending, drawn by the knowledge that Hannah would be there with her recovering father. The fairgrounds bustled with activity, livestock competitions, crafts displays, food stalls, and a dance platform erected in the center. Yates spotted Hannah immediately, radiant in a sky-blue dress he hadn't seen before, her honey-blonde hair arranged more elaborately than her usual practical style. She smiled upon seeing him, excusing herself from conversation with the blacksmith's son to approach. "You came," she said, echoing her words from that first church gathering months ago. "Seemed worth seeing," he replied, his eyes not leaving her face. "Father insisted on coming, though he's still weak. He's judging the preserve's competition, quite contentious, apparently." They walked together through the fairgrounds, their conversation easy and natural now, after months of acquaintance. When Hannah was called away to help with a child who had fallen and cut his knee, Yates found himself watching her tend to the boy with gentle efficiency, a strange pride filling his chest. "You look at my daughter like a man with intentions," came a voice beside him. Dr. Anderson had approached without Yates noticing, a sign of how distracted he'd been. "Sir, Yates began but found words inadequate. "No need for explanations," the doctor said mildly. "I've watched you these past months. You're not the man I would have chosen for Hannah, too many shadows in your eyes, but you've shown yourself honorable. And she smiles differently when you're near." "My past isn't something easily left behind," Yates admitted. "None of ours are, son. We all carry ghosts. The question is whether we let them determine our futures." The doctor patted his arm with a frail hand. "Hannah deserves happiness, so I suspect do you." As evening approached, lanterns were lit around the dance platform. The town's small band struck up a lively tune, and couples began to gather. "Will you dance, Mr. Young?" Hannah asked as they watched the preparations. "I don't dance, Miss Anderson." "Cannot or will not," she challenged gently. "Both likely," he admitted with the ghost of a smile. "Then we shall watch together." She settled beside him on a bench, comfortable in his silence in a way few people had ever been. As they sat observing the dancers, a commotion arose near the fairground entrance. Voices raised in alarm, and Yates instinctively moved to place himself between Hannah and potential danger. Through the crowd came Sheriff Collins, his face grim. "Yates," he called, "you're needed. Reeves and his men have been spotted heading this way." Cold determination settled over Yates. "How many?" "5 heavily armed. Word is they're coming for the county tax, money stored in our bank after the livestock sales." Hannah clutched Yates' arm. "You can't face 5 men alone." "I won't be alone," Yates replied, nodding toward Wilcox's ranch hands who were already gathering. "But I need you to take your father home immediately, if there's shooting." "I should stay, there could be injuries," she protested. "Hannah," it was the first time he'd used her given name, "please." Something in his tone reached her. "Promise me you'll be careful." Instead of answering, Yates did something utterly out of character. He leaned down and briefly pressed his lips to hers, a kiss so gentle and swift it might have been imagined, yet it carried the weight of every unspoken feeling between them. "Get somewhere safe," he said softly, then turned to join the sheriff. The ensuing confrontation occurred at Silverdale's edge. Reeves and his men, emboldened by months of successful raids, hadn't expected organized resistance. The gunfight was brief but intense. When it ended, 2 outlaws lay dead, 1 wounded, and 2, including Reeves, had fled into the darkness. Yates had taken a bullet to his left shoulder, though he barely registered the pain through the rush of combat. As the sheriff organized a posse to pursue the escaped outlaws, Yates found himself guided firmly toward the doctor's cabin by Pete and another ranch hand. "You need tending, and Miss Hannah will have our hides if we don't bring you to her," Pete insisted. Hannah was waiting, her medical supplies already arranged. Her face paled at the sight of blood-soaking Yates' shirt, but her hands remained steady as she helped him to a chair and began cutting away the fabric. "Not how I planned this evening," Yates commented through gritted teeth as she probed the wound. "Nor I," she replied, her voice tight with controlled emotion. The bullet went clean through muscle, missing bone and major vessels. "You're fortunate." "I generally am." His eyes never left her face as she worked. After the wound was cleaned, stitched, and bandaged, Hannah sent her father to rest and sat across from Yates at the kitchen table. In the lamplight, with danger past, the emotions they'd both controlled during the crisis threatened to surface. "You kissed me," Hannah said quietly, then went to face gunmen. "Poor timing," he acknowledged. "I'm not practiced at this. At kissing." At caring for someone enough to fear losing them. The admission cost him, but after facing death, honesty seemed less frightening. Hannah reached across the table to take his hand. "Is that what you feel, Yates, that you care for me?" "More than care," he met her eyes directly. "More than I've allowed myself to feel for anyone in years. It terrifies me." "Why?" "Because everyone I've ever loved has been taken from me. Because attachment on the frontier is asking for heartbreak." Hannah's grip on his hand tightened. "Or perhaps it's the only thing that makes the frontier bearable." She took a deep breath. "I love you, Yates Young. I've loved you since I watched you gentle that wild mare no one else could approach. Since I saw how you listened to my father with respect when others saw only a failing old man. I love your silences and your rare smiles and the way you look at me when you think I don't notice." The declaration left him speechless. In all his imaginings, he hadn't dared hope for such directness, such certainty. "You don't need to respond now," Hannah continued. "You're injured and exhausted, but know that whatever shadows haunt you, whatever fears you carry, I am not afraid of them or of loving you." That night, Yates slept in the Andersons' spare room, his injured shoulder throbbing in time with his pulse and Hannah's words echoing in his mind. By morning, he had reached a decision. When Hannah brought him coffee at dawn, Yates was already dressed and seated at the kitchen table, his expression resolute. "I need to tell you about my past," he said without preamble. "Before you decide if your feelings remain unchanged." Over the next hour, he revealed the history he'd kept guarded for years. The attack on his family's homestead when he was 20, his failed attempts to bring the raiders to justice. The years spent as a bounty hunter, occasionally crossing lines he'd once believed immovable. The emptiness of his existence and his conviction that it was safer that way. Hannah listened without interruption, her eyes occasionally filling with tears but her gaze never wavering. "The man I became after losing my family isn't someone I'm proud of," Yates concluded. "I've killed men, some who deserved it, some I'm less certain about. I closed myself off from feeling anything because it seemed the only way to survive." "And now," Hannah asked softly, "now I find myself wanting things I've denied for years, a home, purpose beyond the next job, connection." He looked directly at her. "You. Then perhaps it's time to stop running. It won't be easy. Reeves is still out there, and men like him have long memories. My past could bring danger to your door." Hannah smiled slightly. "Life brings danger to everyone's door, Yates. The question is whether we face it alone or together." "Together," he said, the word feeling foreign yet right on his tongue. "If you'll have me, Hannah Anderson, I want to build a life here." "With you?" Her answer came not in words but in movement as she rose from her chair, rounded the table, and with gentle care for his injured shoulder, brought her lips to his. This second kiss contained all the promise their first hasty one had only suggested, tenderness and passion, and the foundation of a future neither had dared imagine until now. "Doctor." Anderson found them thus when he entered the kitchen moments later, but rather than embarrassment, his weathered face showed only satisfaction. "Well," he said mildly, "I suppose I should prepare myself to perform a wedding ceremony before winter sets in." In the weeks that followed, Silverdale buzzed with the news of the engagement between Hannah Anderson and Yates Young. Yates accepted the sheriff's offer of a deputy position, his tracking skills and familiarity with outlaw methods proving valuable to the growing community. Maxwell Reeves remained at large, a shadow on their happiness but not one they allowed to dominate their plans. The town rallied around them, protective of their doctor's daughter, and gradually accepting the former drifter who had helped defend them. Dr. Anderson's health stabilized enough for him to resume limited practice, with Hannah continuing to assist and expand her medical knowledge. Together, she and Yates began construction on an addition to the Anderson cabin, rooms for their future together, while maintaining proximity to her father and the medical office. On a crisp October morning, with aspen leaves turning gold against the Montana sky, Hannah Anderson became Hannah Young in a ceremony that drew the entire community. Dr. Anderson, supported by two friends, walked his daughter down the church aisle to where Yates waited, scarcely believing the turn his life had taken. "I take you, Hannah, to be my lawfully wedded wife," Yates spoke clearly, his voice carrying to every corner of the packed church. "I promise to protect you, provide for you, and love you all the days of my life. Where once I wandered without purpose, with you I have found my home." Hannah's vows were equally heartfelt. "I take you, Yates, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to stand beside you in all seasons, to face whatever comes our way with courage and faith, and to love you with the same steadfastness you have shown me. Your strength has become mine, and mine yours." As winter settled over Silverdale, the young household established its rhythms. Yates' duties as deputy took him throughout the county, but he always returned to the warm light of home, where Hannah waited with her gentle strength and unwavering love. Dr. Anderson, watching his daughter's happiness bloom, found his own health improving under the care of both Hannah and her husband, who treated the old doctor with the respect of a son. "You were right," Yates told Hannah one evening as they sat before the fire in their new rooms, "about everything." "I usually am," she teased, leaning against his shoulder, fully healed now and stronger than before. "But what specifically?" "That attachment isn't weakness. That caring for others doesn't make the frontier more dangerous, it makes it worth the danger." He brushed a strand of honey-blonde hair from her face. "For years I survived by feeling nothing. You taught me how to live instead." Hannah took his hand, guiding it to rest against her abdomen with a meaningful smile. "And soon you'll have even more reasons to be grateful for that lesson." Understanding dawned in Yates' eyes, followed by wonder and joy that would have been unrecognizable to the hardened drifter who had ridden into Silverdale less than a year before. "A child." "Our child," Hannah confirmed, "due by summer's end." As Yates gathered his wife into his arms, he marveled at how completely his world had transformed. The false belief that had guided him for so long, that love was a liability in a harsh land, had been replaced by the truth Hannah had shown him through her simple kindness and unwavering heart. In loving her, he had found not weakness but a strength he hadn't known existed, the courage to build rather than merely survive, to plant roots where once he had only left tracks in the dust. In the depths of a Montana winter, with snow piling against the window panes and the promise of new life growing within his beloved's body, Yates Young had finally come home.